What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Yours Truly podcast. I am your host, Christian Baxter, and today we have Kale Zelden in the Yours Truly virtual studio. I asked Kale to come back. I wanted to discuss kind of a mid-year in review of him, what he's been up to on the internet, in this corner of the internet. Also wanted to highlight the upcoming Midwest Estuary, talk with him as he's a featured I guess he's a featured moderator for the event with John Vervaeke and Jonathan Peugeot and Rod Hare and Elizabeth Oldfield, Paul Vanderclay, and who am I missing? Kale Zelden. That may be it. But yeah, I wanted to highlight that and then just kind of go over some of his highlights of the year. He had some viral moments over on X, stuff he's been writing about, kind of his push and his hustle on the internet. Just curious to pick his brain and to get the I think it's McMo who's given Kale the moniker of Unk, the corner uncle. Cool. That's hard to say together. And yeah, kind of see how he sees the situation as monitored. So looking forward to this conversation today. Excited to reconnect with Kale. He was the second guest I had on this podcast over 100 episodes ago. So I'm really excited to reconnect with him as well. So without further delay, I give you Kale Zelden, the Underneath, here on the Yours Truly podcast.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.
This morning. I have thoughts.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
I just hit record, so we're going now.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, we could talk about that. I've already got our intro done, but dude, thanks for being here with us today.
Oh yeah,
And
my pleasure.
I just really reached out because you were the second person I had on this podcast. I don't know if you know that, and that's like over a year ago. It's wild. A lot's happened in that year, and one of the things I wanted to reach out and talk to you about was just, I mean, you and I had like a handful of offline conversations just talking about doing YouTube and social medias and all that kind of stuff. And, you definitely like picked up the grind this year. You started out with January. You posted a video almost every day or something like that.
I did a challenge. A friend of mine, Steve Skojic, he said, because, as one does with your friends, you sort of, call each other up and gripe. You're like, oh, well, my life is, not going anywhere. I'm struggling. And he's like, I'm tired of hearing it from you, Kale. You've got to just do this. Look, do it. Post it fast, crappy, like whatever it is, 30 days, just do it. And so I'm like, all right, those moments you just sort of respond to it. So I did. And I don't know. It was kind of a fun challenge. I think I probably need somebody to sort of do that again, like Kale. You need to post 2 videos a week, no matter what, something like that, because it's easy to kind of fall off a little bit. But anyway, I had a pretty hectic and crazy June. So I feel like I have to give myself a little bit of an excuse, and we can maybe talk about that later on, what was going on in June. But really, so I started last January, or this past January, I should say.
Yeah, and then when was the hat meme? When was the hat? What month was that? Was that this year?
It was. We're coming up on, I believe it was in late August or early September.
Okay.
Where I went viral for admonishing folks about wearing ball caps. And of course, when you bang out an X post, you don't really, I don't know, the way that I do it is I'm just something pops into my head, and I thumb it out, and think, I'm just, because I'm like grabbing stuff, these things that just sort of pop into my head, and that's really the way that I use X, is a way to kind of get a lot of stuff that's sort of surfacing in my
quickly.
Yeah, and I just sort of get it out, and a lot of it is just sort of clear my head, and sometimes weird things hit, and that was certainly one of those times where and of course it was all hate, I mean, it
Well,
got ratioed and the whole 9 yards. It was pretty
that's like
amazing.
what gets the attention though,
Yeah,
is
yeah,
like
yeah,
the negative
yeah,
attention. But
yeah,
you had that experience, then you were published by Unheard this year.
yeah, yeah.
Like I mean, those are, I just wanted to be somebody that said, publicly, like, hey man, good job, or
Thank
that's,
you. I,
surely that was
yeah,
exciting. And I think I commented on the original idea that you were talking about, people kind of elites of the Northeast are sending their kids to like schools in the Southeastern Conference, like
right.
Alabama and
That's right.
Texas and stuff. And that got picked up, that went viral as well.
It
Uh,
did. Yeah, that one really blew up. And I felt a little bit better about that one because I felt like I was saying something that was true that a lot of people weren't really talking about. And I
mm,
and I and I do, not that I'm necessarily looking, well, again, maybe I am. I mean, maybe part of what as a friend, my Steve and I always joke that, we're monitoring the situation, right?
yeah, I want to talk about that meme too.
Yeah, yeah, we're monitoring the situation. And so and part of it's directly in line with my experience as a prep school teacher in New England, but I'm also from the South. And so I always
Right.
have a kind of dual consciousness when it
Yep.
comes to these kind of matters. I'm also a conservative or
Mm,
or a traditionalist sort of in
yep.
in a world that is not conservative or traditionalist at all. And so I also have a kind of double consciousness due to that. I'm also a practicing Catholic
Yeah.
in a world that was at one point ethnically and practicing Catholic, with Irish populations, Italian populations, Portuguese populations, French populations, all of which have radically receded, almost in a kind of Quebec style recession of lived Catholicism. So that also affords me a kind of
Yeah.
dual consciousness. And so I just try to pay attention to those things so that when the football or the football school thing popped into my head, I mean, that's a prejudice that I've been dealing with since I moved back up here, 18 years ago. In fact, we're coming up on the 18-year
Right.
anniversary of my move. So yeah, so I was, and then of course to get noticed, right?
Yeah.
Everybody wants to get noticed, right? And to get noticed by an editor at Unheard, and that was a cool process. He's like, "Hey, like, what do you think?" I'm like, "Yeah, but of course I'm playing it totally cool, like,
Right.
oh
Right.
well, I'll see. I mean, I'll see if there's something we can, Anyway, of course I'm like, yes, 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 let's do this thing, and just kind of working with him through that. And what was weird about that, Christian, is that I had, for the first time in my life, I had real writer's block, and
Mm.
and I, which is weird because I'm sure you can gather from we're friends on X. I say things all the time. Like,
Right.
I write, I write on my Substack, and I never have a problem. But all of a sudden, it was weird because it's Unheard, and Unheard's not the New York Times. It's not,
It is
Slate,
of the
or
corner though,
but and
like,
in the corner, it's kind of a big deal, right? I mean, right, and and I actually read it. I mean, they stable some of my favorite contemporary writers, and so
yes.
I felt all of a sudden a kind of weird pressure, to like, do I conform myself? Do I fit in? And finally, you have to kind of negotiate this dance a little bit of, all right, well, I'm writing for a much bigger platform now, so I have to have a kind of more of a public,
Gravitas. Yeah.
yeah, more of a public voice. And but it was hard because that was kind of working against, like, I wanted to just say something that was true, and so we worked it out. But it was an interesting experience, I have to say, and really
Yeah,
cool.
it is. And, getting, like you said, I think you said the word noticed or something like that,
Yeah,
and being invited to, for like, one of the reasons I reached out to you is to kind of highlight the Midwest estuary and just get that continued in the, people thinking, whoever's paying attention to these conversations. But, you were asked to kind of host or MC
yeah,
that, and it's, uh, being noticed, for the gifts or the talents, or, the, just, even some of it's just for like, keeping on. One of the things I kind of told myself about what I'm doing here is, you win what you win as long as you don't quit.
yeah,
You,
yeah,
you know, and
yeah,
that related to how you started your year out.
yeah,
Just kind of like, I'm going to push here. Some of the conversations we had, 6-9 months ago,
yeah,
and so that's, I mean, I'm kind of just kind of there with you as well in that.
Well, it's so funny that you bring this up because I forgot about the unheard thing.
Hmm.
Um, I forgot, and I'm in a sort of a but especially in conjunction like with the Midwestuary, like I'm super excited, Christian, as you might
Yeah.
imagine. I mean, I know Rod, Rod and I
Yeah.
are friends, and so that's been so cool, and just having that friendship over the years. But you know, PVK and Jonathan Pageau and John
Sure.
Vervaeke and Elizabeth
Yeah.
Oldfield, like it's like I'm like, wait, what? And then you see my little face like, and Kale Zelden. I'm like, what is this?
Yeah, that's exciting.
It's really exciting, and I I'm recognizing now as we're talking about it, I have really, it's been kind of hanging out just outside of my mental Overton
Sure.
window. It's like
Yep.
it's like, or like on a stage, it's just off stage, but I know it's there, but I haven't been paying too much attention to it just because I've got all these other things that what I've been doing um the last month and a half, that it's like, okay, I have to start focusing on that. And but in part it's like as soon as I open up that window just a little bit,
Yeah.
oh no, like what am I going to do? What am I going to talk about? So I know that it's coming. And so I've already been
Yeah. It
chewing
starts
on, and
to seep in.
yeah, it's right. It's starting to seep in, and I'm starting to think about. And of course, I've been thinking about it the whole time. I mean, that's just the sort of the cool way that the unconscious works, right? It's like you really are kind of chewing on it in the background. So
Yeah. So what has been going on? You said something about this
yeah.
month being busy or
Well, yeah, it's been a crazy month. I mean, so the end of the school year for us is always, the Memorial Day weekend is graduation weekend, or commencement as we call it, and then we've got exam week the following week, and then right after that we have the closing faculty meeting. So I would say that the end of May, early June is always a fairly typical, a fairly busy time of the year for me. But this year I had the added, so my oldest daughter Hannah graduated from Portsmouth Abbey, the school where I teach. So that was really exciting. This is my first time going through that process. We moved here when she was 6 months old. So
oh wow.
in many respects, I date myself and my time here at the Abbey with Hannah as she's growing
Yeah.
up, and she's wonderful, and all of that. So graduation weekend, which I had always sort of treated as like, well, whatever. It's graduation weekend. It's really not my thing. I don't like goodbyes in general, so I just sort of look for an opportunity just to wave goodbye to some of my students, and they know where I am. They know I'm here, and they can get in touch with me, and they do. But I just don't like the whole thing, and so I would walk up for commencement, do commencement, and then walk out, and then sayonara, see you later. But this year, of course, my
Mm.
daughter's graduating. My mom and dad are in town. My mom's mom is in town. We've got, so it's just this big, cool event, and it was wonderful. It was really amazing, and I'm so proud of her. And it was just a great time. And
Well, yeah.
then,
Oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, and your brother obviously was in town.
Yeah, right. Okay, so right. So so then so graduation weekend happens, and then exams, and so I have to grade all these papers, grade
Mm.
all these exams, we write comments, like narrative comments for each of the students that we teach. So that's like, like I have found in my time that that is not something that one should fake, right? So you're writing real things for your students, and so that takes it out of you. But then the following weekend, my youngest child, she graduated from St. Philomena's right across the way, K-8 school that she's been to the last few years. So she graduated. So then we had grandparents in town again for that, and then she graduates, and then um, a few days later, all of us then fly down to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where is my hometown. Well, I was born in New Orleans, but we really grew up in Baton Rouge. My younger brother Josh was being ordained a priest, and
Ah, okay.
so then anyway, so we did that. It was an amazing weekend. You've got ordination, you've got all these family members that have flown in and come in town, including us. and it's like it's kind of like a wedding,
Yeah. Yeah, it
um
is. It is
and
actually.
it really is. And so we were there, a few days beforehand, a few days afterwards. Then we fly back up here to Rhode Island, and then my brother, Father Josh, flies up because he's coming on vacation before he reports for duty on July 1st. So
Oh, wow.
anyway, so it's just been, and I'm basically an extrovert, although in my
Sure.
in my older age, I'm becoming more and more of an introvert, but
Right.
whatever. I think that's normal. But it's fine. But I've been like on for almost a month, a full 8 weeks, almost 2 months. So
Yeah.
yeah, but great stuff, right? Great stuff. You know, um,
When it rains, it
really
pours.
amazing
Like
stuff.
that, just really intense. Your daughters are both like transitioning.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
we're doing a little bit of that. I got my oldest is going to high school. My youngest is
yeah,
going, or my middle is going to junior high. My
yeah.
youngest son, is moving to a different school. So like
Got it
that's been present on my wife's mind a lot more too. And
for sure.
but that these when you said your brother, it's like a wedding, but isn't that kind of the thing if you're going into the order, the
Yeah.
priestly or the nun orders, you kind of are wedding yourself to the church in a certain way, and
Yeah. Well, what you're doing is you are forfeiting. You sort of think about it like on the natural order of things, right? Men and women, they meet each other, they get married, they have children, and they raise those children, and then those children meet men and women and get married and have their own children. There's a sort of a natural cycle to that. And so, but what is unique to the Catholic priesthood, is that and certainly the religious life as well. Either a brother, or a sister, a nun. You are forsaking the natural order of things for the eventual supernatural order of things. And I'm
Mm,
reminded, I forgot, I can't quote the chapter and verse. I'm Catholic after all. But you're neither given or received in marriage in heaven. And so there's an interesting way in which the priest or the nun or the brother skip, right? They
mm,
are, you sort of skip to the heavenly order in anticipation of the heavenly host, as a way of helping build the kingdom here on
yeah.
earth. And so yeah, it's a really a monumental thing and a beautiful thing to see. And
Yeah.
yeah.
One of the things you said earlier was you live like living in the Northeast. You're like in the relationship to the football schools, like the
Yeah,
elite parents, prep school
yeah,
parents are sending their kids to. And I just got through working at a prestigious academic medical center in one of these places
yeah,
in the South, and like all the sorority girls that I worked with in the
yeah,
CVICU that were from Auburn and from like Alabama and the U of A, Arkansas, like
yep,
I was like, oh, this is really interesting. It kind of coincided with what you were saying. These were the
yeah,
at this, high level
yep,
institution, they came from those big state schools. Obviously, there's a regional thing about that, but
sure.
uh,
But it's
but
changing.
yeah, and where that's seen as kind of they yeah, there are other aspects of it too, like how they were affording to live in the city and on that, I it's like it's related to
Well,
their family and all that kind of stuff.
right.
And
Because they get help. In other words, they get help with
yeah, yeah,
rent, and
yeah.
yeah, yeah, totally, yeah,
Well,
yeah,
from
yeah,
from
yeah.
from wealth and that kind of
And
stuff.
connections.
And so it just was it kind of was analogous to I thought about your article in relationship to that. And then but what you said earlier, you said that you're surrounded by a place that doesn't value tradition, it doesn't value like it's not, practicing culturally practicing Catholicism in a Catholic region or whatever.
Yeah,
And it's so interesting because you're surrounded by American tradition,
yeah.
with architecture and that
Especially New
being
England. Yeah, I mean, New
yeah, and
England is like,
the
yeah,
first some of the first touch points and all that stuff of American history, and yet that's where there's like the least amount of, uh, or I don't know if the least, but they're looking for their kids to have some kind of traditional experience,
yeah,
the
yeah,
traditional college experience.
yeah,
They're sending them down to the bumpkins here,
yeah,
in the South, and so the conserved the conserved area where that some of that traditionalism has been conserved, and so I don't know. I was fascinated by that. I actually got a lot. I think my response actually got a little bit of attention because it was such a viral tweet, but because it really was salient to me whenever you said that, and just thinking about how you even recently posted about going to your experience of going to Oxford for the first time, and it's a similar thing. You're inspired by the architecture, but some of these places are like empty. Like, what do you, especially as a Catholic, like like the spirit of these places and the spirit of the architecture, which isn't arbitrary either, but like there's something, they're not connected very well.
Yeah, well, this dovetails a lot with what, if you follow my channel and my X feed, there, I'm sure Grok would give me a pretty good, 10 bullet points. What are the kinds of things that Kale Zelden is obsessed with, and Grok would tell us, right? But, this dovetails with what I've been talking about with Catholicism, the legacy of Catholicism, American Catholicism, the Second Vatican Council, that experience. And so, what is conserved, what is preserved, what is changed, what is altered. I mean, it's very much things that are on my brain. And so, you're right. It does overlap with what I was talking about with matters of faith. And, here, you can go into, you can go into a town, and they have this like beautiful old Catholic church that was necessarily built before 1965, probably built before the war, the Second World War,
1917 or something.
which
Yeah.
right. Well, right. I was to say, and very few things were built between 1914 and 1945. Interestingly enough, for there were things built, of course, but the major architectural movements, there was this massive disruption, and it really wasn't so much 1914, I should say. It's really 1929. Right. That all you have a bunch of things that were built right up to the stock market crash, right, in the Great Depression, and then a ton of stuff built after 1945. And you have this weird fallow period of time where, in that fallow period of time, again, let's just roughly say the 15 years, 1930 to 1945, everything gets altered and shifted and changed and thrown in a new direction. And so you can see that with what do they call it, the various idioms of architecture. And so really, like, what you build, how you build a building is fundamentally linked to what you think you're building the building for, right?
Yeah.
And so I just think it's an underappreciated period of time, the Depression through the end of the Second World War. And so really that spirit, that post 1945 spirit, it was all about modern and new. And all that old stuff got us into quite a pickle. It raised, Hitler, it raised authoritarians, it raised the fascists, it raised communist totalitarianism, it raised all of these things. And so whatever contributed to making that, we're going to do the opposite. We are not going to even flirt with any of those things. And so you see this, and I think in church terms, and maybe this is, no, I think that it probably scales out to way. In church terms, this meant we are no longer building vertical churches. We are building horizontal spaces. Right?
Kale,
We are no,
I have to tell you.
yeah,
So
yeah,
in our little town of 10,000 in
yeah.
Arkansas, my parents got gifted recently this coffee table book about the main street of our little
Okay.
town.
Oh, cool.
And I was looking at it yesterday, two
Yeah.
days ago, whatever, doesn't matter. And so our courthouse that was built around the time of the end of World War II.
Yep.
It was the third courthouse, and I was just reading about this, and I looked back at the previous one, and it had this cool bell tower with a spire.
Yep.
And it was like brown brick, and the new one is like a block.
Yep.
It's like,
Yep.
and just exactly what you're saying. So apparently, what had happened was that it was deemed unsafe because they had put it together with lime. Yeah, lime. I don't know, whatever. The instead of concrete, and the new one was like a big concrete, limestone. something,
Yep.
and it's gray. The other one was like brown brick, and I was like, oh man, that other one looked so cool. It had this
Yeah.
clock, at the top, and this one was just exactly what you're talking about, and it was mainly funded by the WPA.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So it said it cost like $109,000 to build, but our county only had to pay $45,000.
Right. So
And
you
that
can
just,
see the incentive structure. Now, again, you could write a whole book on the
I
ideology
just
of the
saw that.
WPA.
I just noticed it
Yeah.
yet like this weekend exactly what
Yeah.
I was exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And so look, in what I have found, I feel like when I woke up into consciousness around 1989, right?
Mm,
Or sometime in my sophomore year of high school, it's like I woke up, and I was like, man, that's a lot of crap that's gone down. I don't
mm,
know the story, but something's up, right?
mm,
And I really feel like, in some sense, my entire intellectual life has been trying to piece together what happened a few moments before I woke up. Before I showed up on the scene in 1973, what the heck happened? You know what I mean? And what I've come to in my old age here, what I've come to is that what happened was largely on purpose.
mm,
And so, period, full stop. And I just think it's important for people to sort of, it's like, it's okay to say that out loud, right? So now it doesn't mean that it's always nefarious. It doesn't mean that it's always sort of like, twiddling your mustache evilly.
but there was intention.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And so, and because there is intention involved, because it's purposive, we can then ask the question, well, to what end? And I feel like we're not terribly comfortable asking that question. To what end? What was it for? And we've been very subtle and kind of low key about it, and we don't want to sort of point our finger too pointedly at but it's important, I think, that we do that. So for me, like in church terms, just sort of put it into a concrete space here, you know what happened, this shift from a hyper verticality to a hyper horizontalism, that was on purpose. And so then why was that done? And so in my way of sort of thinking, my you'll hear me say this quite a bit, Christian, and I tweet about it, etc. It's like, what happened, just prior to me waking up was on purpose. But what happened is it's really important for us to sort of figure out. All of the bodies are buried in the mid-century. Like, I really fundamentally believe that. And so, PVK has been talking about this, and he's sort of referencing Rusty Reno's book, the Return of the Strong Gods. Everything that has been done in the wake of the Second World War seems to me, if I'm seeing things correctly, it has been done in response to that slogan, never again. And so much of the bad stuff between 1914 and 1945 was blamed on verticality. It was blamed on
Yeah.
hierarchy. It was blamed on strength. It was blamed on vitality. And I think that's a little bit of an overly convenient explanation.
So you're saying that the critique of the post World War II consensus is overly convenient?
No. Sorry. I actually think the critique is way overdue. I think we're
Oh,
living in the midst of critiquing. No, the impulse then, right? The way that I'm thinking this through,
yeah.
and again, I'm thinking out loud, to be fair,
Yep.
is that World War II was awful.
Yeah.
Period. Full stop. World War I was awful. And in between World War I and World War II, we basically lived through a worldwide depression. So that was awful. And so I do not blame anyone for wanting to sort of say, you know what, like what we just lived through, like for the past, 35, 40 years, like we probably don't want to do that again. Right. So
Yeah.
no blame. I really don't blame people for that. But that's essentially a generation that grew up in the midst of this massive conflagration, and think about, again, in addition to, all of these people peoples, these countries, these nations, these alliances who sought to destroy themselves or destroy each other. And then we figured out that in wanting to destroy each other, we destroy ourselves.
Mm.
Maybe this is cause for maybe we shouldn't do things the same. That's why I think that the critique that was rendered is the problem, not the impulse to render a critique.
The original critique, not the current critique. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So, did you watch the Winston Marshall, Jonathan Peugeot conversation?
No, I have not. Darn it.
You need to watch that one.
Okay.
They get into it, and he comes at it from, these symbols, and Jonathan gets pretty,
animated.
Controversial with what he talks about symbolism related to swastika, related to Kanye West and what, like, all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable, and Winston gets visibly uncomfortable in the conversation. He's like, but it is, there is this poking of the bear happening right now, and it is, you see even in like the corner, like Nate and Sam had a conversation about liberalism and like what, and it's honestly, these are the right conversations. Like,
absolutely,
hey, youngsters, or like, are you sure you really wanted to? And then, but it's like, yeah, but last year when I had my conversation with why am I blanking? It's because I'm off the top of my head here.
What were y'all talking about?
We were talking about the woke right. This was like last summer. He's the biggest person I've talked to. He's corner.
Not Kale. Thanks.
It was Kale. Why am I blank? We hung out at ARC a little bit.
Benjamin Boyce?
Ben Boyce, yeah. So we were talking, and that was just coming up because like Konstantin Kisin had just like kind of come out with this like, hey, you woke rightists, and he was like, you're making me want to look over there because this seems like there's, and that's always this tension of, well, man, we can't, and you've seen it in, I guess, popular politics, for at least in my my consciousness in the last 10 to 15 years, is like, no, there's certain things we just can't talk about. And when you do that, the curious or the rebellious, or you're gonna get that response instead of
totally.
And the way you generally that people try to keep people from doing that is through like gaslighting and so it just exacerbates the whole,
and really and edgelording. There's just a ton of edgelording going on, and I agree with you, Christian. What does PBK always say? Buzzwords are holy words, right? And so what's happening is that you have a kind of détente that is established. And so if you think of the post-war, what is the phrase? The post-war consensus.
Yeah.
If you think of the post-war consensus as something that was achieved or rendered or accomplished, right? Think about it in terms of like a peace treaty is something that is achieved. Sorry, there's one second. Sorry, I'm outside. What can you do? The mean streets of Portsmouth. The mean streets of Portsmouth, right? Yeah.
It's blocking it pretty good. I didn't hear anything.
Okay, good. Sorry, maybe it's just me. Okay, so what was I saying? I was saying
post-war consensus.
Oh, yeah. So the post-war consensus is like a détente that has been achieved. And in order to achieve, like, imagine like you're in the midst of a negotiation. Let's just say something stupid, like you and your wife are negotiating on where to go to eat, right? You want to go someplace, and she wants to go someplace, and you do not want to go where she wants to go, and she is not going where you want to go. So what do you have to do? You have to render some kind of compromise. You have to find a third or a fourth place that is not really what you want, because maybe you had some sort of dish or a cocktail that this place has that you really kind of jonesing for, but she's having none of it, but she doesn't want to go to this place. So there are things that are left on the floor when you decide, okay, we're going to go to this third place. I'm not going to be able to have my nachos. You're not going to be able to have your cocktail, but we get to be with each other and we'll go there, right? So we understand that the nature of negotiation, the nature of is a series of trade-offs, right? So that you can look for some kind of win that works for everybody, right? But so then to sort of take it back to the political layer, in order to achieve 1945, I mean, dude, in order to achieve 1945, we had to blow up 2 Japanese cities.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah.
Like, and not beat an army, not sink a couple of battleships, not shoot down all the planes. We had to blow up 2 cities.
Yeah.
And the mind just sort of shuts down, right? When you think of that, like when you just really, if you've ever read an account of a survivor of Nagasaki or Hiroshima, it's like man, it's
Yeah.
it's 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 really easy to treat it in the abstract, and all of a sudden you're like, wait, there's nothing abstract about dropping the atomic bomb, right? So in order to render that consensus, in order to basically say, snap out of it, world, snap out of it, you have to blow up these cities, and you say, okay, breath, 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 what now?
Yeah.
And the post-war consensus. So therefore, there's lots of stuff that didn't get negotiated, didn't get addressed because the larger spirit was like, dude, let's just move on. Let's build something that has nothing to do with anything prior to 1915. Let's just move. And look, Christian, as I'm telling you the story, doesn't it make a certain amount of sense?
Yeah. Like why you would want to move.
Yeah. Like I don't want any part of that stuff because you
Yeah.
know what? You know what I don't want to do again? I don't want to have to make the fateful decision to blow up a city.
Huh.
So
You
that's
know,
a tough one. So
yeah.
therefore I'm super I get it. Like
Yeah.
I get it. But what is happening, I think, with this post-war consensus is that all of those unnegotiated bits, all those things that were carpeted over, it's like mold in a wall.
Yeah.
I can make mold in a wall go away really quick by getting a can of paint and just going over it. Like it looks great, but guess what happens in a week, a month, a year? That mold is just growing up behind the scenes. It's just growing and growing and growing out, and all of a sudden you had a wall that had a problem, but now you've got a whole side of the house. Now you've
There.
got two
Yeah.
sides of a four-side house.
There's always this whole thing about honesty or truth or and people even get like it's a bad thing to be called a truther. Like think about
Yes, yeah, truther, right. That's
it's a
bad,
bad
right?
it's a bad thing. And so shout out to Grimm. Yeah. but like but the that's just interesting.
Remember.
Yeah, that is a negative thing because we and then there's this whole other side that I was thinking of, which is the generational psychological, buzzword trauma that the whole, the great quote unquote the great, even calling them the greatest generation,
Right.
And it probably creates like generational traumas because
Totally.
I was talking to a buddy of mine who just recently got out of the military, and we were having conversations about power, about these dynamics, about war, and all these things, and you think about the how do I frame this? When you were fighting for your village or you're fighting for your even the Civil War to a degree, you're fighting for your region,
Yep.
even though there was like major contention on either side, sometimes brothers and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
It's almost like the psychological trauma of that is less, I could be wrong, than the giant, I am just a cog and I'm just cannon fodder. You're not, what am I really fighting for? You're fighting for your, people talk about it, you're fighting for your brother at that point. You're not fighting for,
The
are you fighting?
cause.
Yeah. Are you fighting for the US on the beaches of Normandy? Like, or who are you,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, that's so true. There's a radical locality that has to surface because the ideas are just too abstract, right? And
yeah,
you see exactly that dynamic. I don't know if you've ever seen the Band of Brothers, the 10
I
part
know of it.
series.
I've
Yeah, do it.
tangent.
It's so good. It's so good. And it really kind of captures that dynamic that it's like, in fact, a lot of the upper ups are just idiots, right? Or why is the army doing this rather than that? Like nobody knows, but you just sort of do it because you're ultimately working for your band of brothers, right?
Yeah.
That's the idea. But the sheer size and scope of
Yeah.
that, the marshaling that materiel and personnel at this scale, like how could you not feel like a termite in a
Yeah,
hill?
that I mean, and somebody that myself even that works in giant
Yeah,
systems of
yeah, yeah,
corporations like
yeah.
healthcare systems, like I'm like I just cog or ant, like you said, like that's the feeling, and it's abstracted from the mission. The people that are in those higher levels, they feel the mission, but you're on the data, it's very abstracted, and then you come home and you get called great, you get called
Yeah, yeah.
hero, and I think that's also because
Well, you
and
like it's like
that's different
how
than if
great do
you
you
were a
feel, right?
tribe. If you were a tribe going to fight another tribe, and you come home and you've won the war, and they call you a hero, you feel like a hero for your
Yeah,
tribe, like
yeah,
your small.
yeah.
But do you feel like a hero on coming back? Maybe you felt like a coward, or you felt like maybe you did things that you're not proud of. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, Christian, you 100% did things that you're not proud of.
Yeah,
Not that you don't understand as necessary to do, because
yeah,
that's a different thing, right?
sure,
And again, it's like even for a good cause, how good do you feel when you kill somebody?
right,
Like, right? There's a great poem uh, by Thomas Hardy, and it's called "The Man He Killed," and it's a the poem is about this guy. He's an ex-soldier who's home now, and he's talking with a guy in a bar, and he's just sort of shooting the breeze, right? And he's like whatever, they're sharing a pint, what have you, and he's telling the story of like, yeah, so I was arranged, he and I were arranged, and he was on the other side and I was on this side, and he shot at me and I shot at him and I shot him dead, and I shot him dead because he was my foe. That's right, he was my foe. He thought he'd list. He was out of work. Like, why not? Strange. I'm paraphrasing the poem here, but
sure,
strange, how quaint a thing war is, that you'd shoot a man down who, in any other circumstance, you would treat half a crown or share a beer with. Right.
yeah,
And just sort of on that radically telescoped level of one on one in the scope of this larger machine, these larger forces that have been put into motion, how could you not find just a little part of yourself being stripped away? And then you return home and everybody's sort of like, yay, heroes. And it's like, look, I'm glad that we support our
sure,
troops, of
yeah,
course, but on the one hand, like the guy who comes back from war, who's had to kill people, they're sort of like, I don't really feel all that
yeah,
much like a hero, man.
yeah.
I killed people.
And that's just abstracted, eh, then we need a narrative to coalesce around, and then we get around that and we just go, and that
Yeah.
stuff goes
Yeah.
unaddressed for
It goes subterranean. Exactly
yeah,
right. All that underneath stuff, which is
yeah, there you go.
one of the reasons why I'm
Look
obsessed
at
with
it.
that idea. Yeah.
So that's kind of the get the poking and the kind of feebleness that it seems, at least at this wherever we land on tip of the spear parts of culture, looking at the post World War II consensus. The only thing I wanted to add was just, I was of the age where World War II documentaries on the Discovery Channel were, I was a cable kid or a satellite,
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Totally.
that was kind of in,
Yeah.
and now, and that was easy to keep that ball going, and the glory of that going in a certain way. And that, there's kind of two ways I want to go with that. One was with the video I sent you, but the other one is, I wanted to hear your kind of thoughts on if you watched the Peter Teal, Ross Douthat
I listened to it.
conversation.
Yeah.
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 Like about, our tech lords interactions with theology,
Yeah.
like, I don't
Yeah.
know. Do you have thoughts on that, or
Oh,
do
I
you,
do. Come on, Christian. You know me. Yeah, I've always got thoughts. Whether they're good thoughts is a different thing. We'll see. Maybe so. Sometime maybe good. Sometime maybe shit. So,
yeah,
so the Teal thing. Look, on paper, I have no business even having like an ounce of respect for Peter Teal, right? Insofar as, all the things that I cry about and I moan about. People always think that I'm always worked up on Twitter. I'm actually pretty matter of fact about Twitter, or X. But anyway, um, you know, he's a tech lord, number one. He's the biggest, if not one of the biggest VCs, right?
Yeah.
He
Kingmaker. Yeah.
Kingmaker. He he's gay. He's married. I assume he has acquired children. All of these are the kind of things that I would poke and prod at and be like, kind of part of the problem, right? But what's interesting to me about Teal is that he's not a normal tech lord.
Yeah.
He's not normal. He's not Elon. Elon strikes me as one of these sort of mad, instinctual, super genius types. I think Teal is different. And part of what makes Teal different is, being exposed to Rene Girard out
Hmm.
at Stanford back in the day. And so Teal has a keen awareness of like the life of the mind. And he's actually pretty serious about this Christian thing.
Yep.
Now, again, I'm sure it's going to tick off all of our friends in the corner, to suggest such a thing, but he's not flighty about Christianity. Like clearly Christianity haunts him
Did you watch his
profoundly.
conversation on the Hoover Institute about
Yes,
apocalyptic literature?
yes, yes,
I
yeah.
was
With Peter
astounded by
Robinson.
that. Yeah, I was astounded by that.
Yeah, bro is not like he would make all those, like when I think of Big Eva, for instance, or if I think of big liberal Catholicism, like America Magazine or Christianity Today, like they all hate the Peter Thiels of the world for one group of reasons. But Teal, his engagement with Christianity is much more profound than 9/10 of the Christians that I come across. And I'm not trying to be combative here. I
Yeah.
really am trying to be matter of fact about it. I mean, the guy knows his stuff. He studies his stuff. I mean, he can quote scripture in pretty impressive ways. This is not a guy who is casual about anything.
Well, it's interesting to hear him give a critique of Calvinism. Like when he said
Yeah,
when
yeah,
he
yeah,
uses that word, it's so charged because
yeah,
that's a niche. Not, I mean, not in this corner, but it's a kind of like that's something I was talking about with my friends in high school,
yeah,
Bible nerd
yeah,
guys,
yeah.
and nobody else in our town cared about that word. And here,
Right,
and he's using it in seriousness, but he's relating it to obviously like determinism. He's like an anti-determinist.
right. But
But
remember,
just to your point,
Christian, our here in the corner, the way we talk about Calvinism is radically influenced by PVK, and PVK's sort of take on Calvinism is remarkably more winsome than the mainstream, at
well,
least in my
yeah,
experience.
well, and I'm Presbyterian at this
Yeah,
point, so it's
yeah,
I have my own relationship to it,
yeah, yeah,
but it's just interesting to hear that being contended with
yes, yes. On a
by
mainstream platform,
yeah, it's like a
Peter Thiel and
weird,
Ross Douthat. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, especially coming out of the new atheist fog. Like it's like that's still shocking to me, related to that. So it just is to hear those, and then he's talking about like prophecy from Daniel, like
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
just
He's just pulling it out of his back pocket to throw it
yeah,
out there. And it's funny, you could watch Ross. Ross is a committed Catholic. I mean, he is
yes,
not a casual Catholic. I mean, he's,
no,
you know, probably skews a little bit more conservative than Trad, but dude is a practicing Catholic and
yeah,
has been a practicing Catholic for his entire adult life since he was a young adult when he and his family converted.
hmm,
And you can kind of see doubt that, and it was a similar he had a similar thing when he was talking to that AI 2027 guy. It's like these are both Silicon Valley guys who are like bringing up these explicitly theological and like nerdy theological
yeah.
things. And he kind of like looks at them and kind of, I imagine him like Jim in the office, like looking,
At the
looking at
camera,
them and then looking at the camera and be like,
did you
you
hear that?
want me to have this conversation right now? Because like I'll do this all day long. But really, this is where we're going to go. So I just think it's hilarious.
It is, but it is also signaling and a tell about what's the vibe shift with religion.
Yes.
All the way up and down.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah. It's real, and I think
yeah,
you're right.
yeah. It's been intense. Speaking of vibe shifts, you covered the new papacy,
Yeah.
pretty, as a Catholic, like,
Yep.
a couple of months in, the hype's kind of wore down. What's kind of
My take.
yeah, right at this moment.
Yeah. Well, um, two things. One, I was surprised about, and then one has sort of come with some reflection. I was surprised at how sorry, let me start over. I was surprised how immediately relieved I felt.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, I don't necessarily have a deep insight into that, but I'm just marking it as a phenomena. Right after the 12 years of the Francis pontificate, um, I just immediately felt different in the week after Leo is elevated to the papacy, and how do we know what we know? It's not like he made some massive appointment. It's not like he came out with some document, right, saying like
Yeah.
this is, none of that sort of stuff. That would be the sort of the normal way, right? But as we know here, denizens of the corner, we talk a lot about epistemology. We talk about knowing.
Symbol.
Yeah, right. In retrieving a more holistic and embodied sense of knowing. And this is why I think Vervaeke's so powerful. I think this is why Pageau's so powerful. I think this is why Peterson has been so powerful. And I think this is why somebody like Matthew Crawford is so powerful. Ian McGilchrist is so powerful. But they're all hearkening back to this sort of post-Enlightenment sense of knowing more than mere ratio, right? Knowing in a sort of a more complete way of knowing. And so I'm just like everybody else. I'm taking in Leo. I see him on the Twitter, and I see him on TV, and I hear people talking about him, and I see him, the symbol of him coming out fully adorned in all of the regalia. And that's really when you recognize that this person you call a you knows in profound and oftentimes unconscious ways. And so what is clear to me is that Leo's different than Francis. Duh, of course he is. But how is he different? I think remains to be seen. But he seems to be a joyful Christian.
Mm.
And I did not always sense that from his predecessor at all. And so I think that I sensed a relief, and there's been nothing that has sort of altered it in the interim. Now, what do I think long term for Leo? Um, Look, I think Leo is a company man. Um,
Mm.
I think Leo is he's probably a man of moderate sensibilities. I think he's a child of the Second Vatican Council. He was born in 1955, which meant he was 10 when the changes started to happen. So he may have had his first communion in the old rite, but basically his entire young adult life and his entire formation in the priesthood, his entire formation in all things Episcopal, have been post-conciliar. And so I think that he's going to be part of the project to retrieve the spirit of the council. Now, you can drive Mack trucks through all of these holes, right? But I think that he's going to look for mechanisms of continuity. And so I don't anticipate anything really like big from him other than, and maybe that's what's needed in this moment. I don't know. But I think he's going to be pretty moderate. I think he's going to look for ways to build bridges. I think the first word out of his mouth when he was on the balcony of St. Peter's was "Peace be with you."
Mm.
And I think that is probably going to be the character of his papacy. If you're looking for first words, Francis's first words were something like "hello." I think that was the translation. And ciao. Y'all can fact check me in the comments. But John Paul II's first words were "Be not afraid."
Mm.
And so look, I believe in the Holy Spirit, Christian. I believe that the Holy Spirit works through the church, despite us. And not, don't worry, folks. I think the Holy Spirit's big. Don't worry. I'm not trying to be super exclusive here, but I think the Holy Spirit works in these moments. And I think peace be with you will be the famous, what are those are the words of Jesus upon the resurrection,
Mhm.
when he shows himself to the 12 in the upper room, peace be
Yeah,
with you.
that's
And
true. After
so,
all the angst, after all the
yeah,
tension and
right.
wondering
Yeah.
what's
You
going
know,
to
and and even as I'm trying to my best to be objective about Francis, to me there are a couple of real telling moments with Francis's pontificate, but the one I think that will endure overall is that his admonition to a group of gathered young people at World Youth Day, in which he admonished them to Hagon Leo, go make a mess. And I don't think that the kids have made such a mess. I think that that was his own kind of permission structure. And I think for whatever reason, he felt that the church had to be shaken up and a mess had to be made. And I think Leo's job will be to put some things back together.
interesting. Yeah, what did you mean by the spirit of the council?
Yeah, that's a fraught phrase. Um, so I don't know how much you want to nerd out on Vatican II lore, but the council ran 1963, 1964, and 1965. And you have a gathering of all these cardinals from around the world, and bishops and cardinals and monsignors and priests. They would come and they had these lengthy sessions in the middle of 63, in the middle of 64, in the middle of 65. At the culmination of 65, they voted on all the various things and they promulgated the documents of the Second Vatican Council. And you can buy collections called the Second Vatican Council, and they've got titles for each of the chapters of each of the works. And right away, there was a fight over what the documents meant, or rather, what the council meant, and two groups kind of coalesced in uh, the kerfuffle in the aftermath of the promulgation. And you had the group of folks who gathered under the name of the concilium, and then you had the other group was the communio. So you had concilium and communio. Concilium were folks that were oftentimes heralded the spirit of Vatican II, and the concilium group so roughly a kind of progressive push the envelope. We need to modernize the church group versus a kind of more grounded, conservative read of the council. And so both were fighting over the spirit of the council. Now, as a kid in America, what
Mm.
I heard in terms of the spirit of the council was full speed ahead progressivism. Full speed ahead with let's stop it with this verticality and let's bring in this horizontal quality. And so let's go, no more of this top down stuff. Let's make it lateral. Let's make it buy-in, that kind of basic dynamic, which of course is played out in every church. This is not unique to Catholicism. I'm sure the Presbyterians fought over this. I know every mainline.
The worship wars.
Yeah, right, right. And it manifests in certain
Yeah.
ways. And yes, I think the worship wars are part of that fight. And so when I talk about the spirit of the council, that's kind of what I'm talking about, because a lot of things were done in the spirit of the spirit of the council suggests that we do X or Y or Z. And it didn't matter if you said, yeah, but in this document that was the official document of the fathers of the council
I
suggests that
see.
we do A, B, and C. And they're like, no, the spirit of the council trumps the letter of the council. So it became a weird argument over the letter and the spirit, although I think that that's also an unfair frame, but that's kind of the way it played out.
Very fascinating, related to authority
Yes.
and
Oh, yes.
you
Yes.
know uh, the written word and
Yeah.
the vibes and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
The thing that it immediately when you said that, I've been putting together liturgies for our church for a couple of
Yeah.
years now, and that was one of our first conversations I had with you was about liturgy. I don't know if you recall that, but and it immediately made me think of I can't remember Ratzinger's uh,
Benedict.
Benedict's book the spirit of the liturgy.
I'm literally reading it right now. Have you read this thing? I'm literally reading it right now. It's yeah. Sorry.
No, but I got, I kind of grokked it a little
Yeah,
bit,
yeah. Of course, that's fine. Yeah.
and in kind of like looking at these historical liturgies in Anglicanism and mainline, like I was like looking at these liturgies and the Mass and the Eastern and everything, trying to like, so what's been going on here, and then I did some kind of like, hey, I want this guy, Williamson Nevin, who was a Reformed theologian, to have a conversation with Ratzinger about worship, about liturgy. So kind of doing but it is, what are that word, and even related to this conference we have coming up, the fellowship of the Spirit. Like what, we're kind of like, what is that, and what should we follow? And
well, this is interesting. You were asking me earlier, what am I thinking of for the Midwestuary? I'm I keep getting pulled back into two words, liturgy and play, which is so Ratzinger comes out with this book called The Spirit of the Liturgy, but The Spirit of the Liturgy was the name of the book that he read as a young man by a theologian called Romano Guardini. And so I'm actually reading Guardini's Spirit of the Liturgy, and then I'm going to make my way into the Ratzinger's Spirit of the Liturgy, and I'm trying to pull some things, not so much to make an argument about like Latin Mass or vernacular Mass, or I don't want to necessarily only focus on liturgy qua liturgy, but the way in which liturgy informs all these things. And so when we talk about the fellowship of the Spirit, we're working out here in this little corner and elsewhere. We're working out a kind of a sense of liturgy, aren't we?
Yeah, but we have to look to history for that. Like
right. Amen.
And I one of the things, being on like the far reaches of the other side of Christian liturgies for most of my life, with rock and roll, and it's like exhausted itself. And this can kind of lead us into that video I sent you, but that I remember having the feeling of, oh, what's next? Oh, what's kind of going to be the next? And I think people my age that were feeling that 20 years ago, and even I think it goes down to no one thinks there is a next. We all kind of know that the next is AI and kind of trans. Those are kind of like, whoa. I don't know if that's really where I want to go. So where else do you go?
Well, Christian, even the idea that like what's next, right?
Yeah.
That in and of itself is a novelty of this post-war consensus, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, we're talking specifically in the Register of Church here, but I remember when PVK, this is about a year and a half, 2 years ago, PVK was talking about, was the name of that movie The Jesus Revolution?
I think so.
About Lonnie, and you know what I'm talking about?
The one from that had Kelsey Grammer in it.
Yes, that one,
Yeah.
Love that movie, and I loved PVK's riffing on it. I thought it was really, really, really good. But the novelty of the Jesus movement is itself a product of a deracinated culture. And so I think my sense is what you're sensing, and this is what I'm sensing in my own tradition, is that having been cut off so radically from our traditions, we are stuck with constantly looking for the new thing.
Yeah.
And what if constantly looking for the new thing is a death script? What if it's what if it's a death liturgy unto itself? And my sense is that it is kind of, and that we need to find a way to tap into post-war consensus roots, or we're going to be stuck in a decadent death script.
Yeah, and that's the impulse. I mean, someone I've followed pretty closely for ill and for better in the last 2 years is the Redeemed Zoomer kid that, because he's 22 and he's been asking these questions. He's there's a lot of mimetic power to what he did. You don't, with what he used some formatting. A buddy of mine, a younger friend of mine who's a Gen Z, said, hey, he's doing stuff like this. I was like, okay, but it doesn't matter. He was effective with it.
Yeah.
The young people, there's a whole stream and even in the corner, like people move in the evangelicals moving back into atheists and then deconstruction or whatever, and then into tradition, historical tradition, and then you see the younger people, and then but even the people that haven't left those, like the kind of like more flat spaces, are still like, hey, it's, you can't just poke at this thing either. We're maybe we stay here, but we're asking the same questions.
Right. And this is so, Guy, I had, because I have my own versions of the Gen Z rad trads, right?
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to get them to remember, failing, but whatever, I'm going to keep trying, Christian, is there's no such thing as return.
Yeah.
Right? The RETVRN, return. There's no such thing as return, because even if we go back and reclaim some of these abandoned liturgies, these abandoned traditions, these abandoned thought patterns, we will always have been the people who went back and retrieved things. And you cannot memory hole the post-war consensus.
Yeah.
Right? So, and I get the impulse to radically simplify and just pretend none of this happened. We're just gonna pretend that we're gonna go back to 1910. Screw all this novel experiment. We're not going to do this anymore. No, even if you achieve some kind of neo-traditional expression, it's always going to have been informed by this radical foray into this horizontal move.
Well, I mean, I've got you said you don't have your camera on, but I've got this little thing my kids bought me, which is this bobblehead with a electric guitar. It says "My Dad Rocks."
Yeah. Okay.
And like,
that's great.
We do, like, I can do no other than these kind of modern songs. Like I'm it would be very disingenuous. Oh, I'm going back. I'm going to lead a choir, orchestra. I did take a conducting class in my undergrad. I have a minor in music, but I'm so far away from that. But there are sensibilities about it that I like. Well, maybe you could try this little thing, but there's this sense of self-hatred that I think is so unhealthy related to what you're talking about. It's like, oh, you have to kind of go through your shadow, and that thing has to kind of be embraced to understand, or else it's going to go down and then come back up and destroy you or whatever. Like if I went into a high tradition and like completely abandoned and hated that part of me that led rock worship songs for 15 years, that's just the example of kind of what you're talking about, something more broad.
No, like, but I love this. This is great. This is good. Keep going.
Yeah, because like things that I did with my wife and music I teach my kids, and and all those experiences, the bands that I had, the guys, like, you just like, oh, that you were wrong, and then you were evil, and and I see your tweets. So you posted a picture of some it was some old picture of a guy in a cathedral with a acoustic guitar, and you could kind of see that. And I also agree with that. Like, I also think that what happened in these contexts, messed with stuff. But at the same time, like, here I am, a product of it.
Yeah. And I love, and this is what I feel schizophrenic about this stuff too, because like my first religion, the first religion that I chose was rock.
Yeah.
I mean, I've told this story, a version of this story before, but sometime early on in my high school career, I kind of became I guess I would call it a new agnostic. I don't think I was ever a full-blown atheist, but I became a kind of agnostic. And so, but my religion those years was Rolling Stone magazine and rock and roll music. And my church fathers were Led Zeppelin, The Who, the Beatles, and the Rolling Stones. And I was dead serious about that research project, right? And so any new music that was coming out, I'm like, what do the church fathers have to say about that? Mick, what do you think? Robert, what do you think? Roger, what do you think? And I knew my stuff backwards and forwards. So even then I was a kind of traditionalist of a sort. I know that I'm saying this out loud, but in other words, I love rock music, and I loved the idea of Woodstock, and I loved the scene. I loved all this stuff. And yet the thing that gave me the most insight into the power of liturgy and the power of music and the power of belief was when I was a freshman in college, and I went to, no, sorry, I was a senior in high school, and I went down to New Orleans and I saw a Jane's Addiction concert. And I just had one of those Holy Spirit moments where, and again, I am away from those things, right, Christian? Like I am not any way, shape, or form a practicing Catholic at this point.
The denim wars.
The pre-denim wars, I probably was. I'm sure I was rocking denim back then. Maybe that's why. Yeah. So yeah, a little insight into my psyche here. But I'm at this rock concert, and Perry Farrell is just a great front man. He's just so good. And we're there, and it's like we're in this huge, no seats, right? This huge mosh pit, and we are just throbbing up and down in unison to the heavy beat, right? And he is screaming those high notes out loud, and it's awesome. I'm getting chills just thinking about it right now. And we're in this moment, and I'm kind of like, you have those weird moments where you're in the midst of sort of this crowd and you're a part of the hive, right? And
Yeah.
all of a sudden this thought pops into my head. This guy could ask us to do anything he wanted to right now, and none of us would say no.
Mm.
And it like chilled my soul. I mean, chilled my soul. And I, whatever, left that night, and I couldn't put it to bed. And I couldn't put it to bed. And that eventually led me out of that church
Mm.
and back into tradition, because I recognized in that moment that what I thought of as religious was bigger. Now I have much better language about this stuff now, in the post Tom Holland and post Pajot and Peterson and all of these guys that we look to in Vervaeke, we look to in the corner. So I have better language for that now. But what I was responding to then was this was a religion that was oriented toward a different spirit, and a
Mm-hmm.
spirit that ultimately chilled me to my core. Because even when I flirted with non-belief, I've never flirted with, like, I've always just known in my bones that evil was real and wanted me.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, and look, I'm sure Perry Farrell was just high that night and he was having a good time. I'm not importing any kind of active evil
Yeah.
onto that moment or even onto that person, but I just knew that I was not just me. That even if I wanted to sort of fight against the mob was bigger than me. The spirit that animated that mob was bigger than me. So, okay. So then I kind of read my way back into tradition, and I am a much, so, but I get why the larger evangelical world goes to the idiom, because it moves you, right? It's so
It has
it's
power.
yeah, it
Has
really,
power.
really does. And look, I've been part of Catholic charismatic, movements and all of that. I can see the great good it can do to light young people on fire,
Mm.
and to orient them toward those spaces. But I have become quite dubious about it in terms of capital L liturgy.
Yeah. Yeah. There's like the way that I've kind of come to it. And I kind of thought this when I went to Symbolic World Summit,
Yeah.
and there was like a Friday night, Dirt Poor Robins is doing
Yeah.
their concert, and then Saturday's conference, and then Sunday morning, a bunch of people went to liturgy. And I was like, that seems like the right thing.
Yeah.
That like
Yeah.
Friday night is
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
rock and roll is like supposed to be or
Yeah.
something, even in a more positive
Yeah,
spirit.
exactly, exactly.
That's like,
Yeah, to be
or
clear, I still went to shows after that. Like
yeah,
I learned to appreciate them in a different way. So
yeah,
I love rock music still, and
yeah.
I bemoan the fact that it's dead now. But anyway, keep going.
Which is my wife and I, we have a podcast coming out tomorrow, but Chris Williamson interviewed this. They would have been considered screamo or hardcore back in around 2003 when I was in college listening to them, and they were in the Christian underground. They're a band called Under Oath. He just interviewed them,
Wow.
which was kind of a weird
Wild. Yeah,
crossover
wild.
for me. It was very sub-genre thing, and
Yeah.
he's like a fan. He said, Chris Williamson said he spent his last like $25 at one point when he was doing his club promotion to go see these guys in northern England somewhere.
That's wild. What a weird. Okay, that's cool. I love that. That's a great
And
story.
it only has like after a few days 35,000 views, which is probably pretty low for him because it's like
low for Chris. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's like not a he wasn't Matthew McConaughey, on his. But
nor is he a life hack bro, right? This
yeah,
is different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, but it was so genuine. It was so good, and it
Oh,
resonated.
I'm gonna cue it up. I'm gonna listen to it.
The first 15-20 minutes is, I think, worth the listen for the whole thing, because it gets into this idea about they talk about chronic displacement, and and I experienced some of that as a travel nurse. I experienced some of that as somebody that used to travel to different churches on weekends and be gone, and my wife's got the kids at home, and there's like this when you come back together, difficulties and all these kind of things. But
yeah, no, that makes this resonate.
It's not exactly connected, but there is. I mean, it diagnoses something related to this glamorous thing that we look at as something we might want in our lives or whatever. Right. And but I don't know if I really want to go anywhere with that, but but mentioning that, I guess.
Well, we were talking about rock music as the idiom that the evangelical church has essentially embraced in the last 35 years or so.
I guess I'm acutely aware of its ills. My wife tells a story. I was at a church camp in 2006, and at the end of the week there was lines of people like wanting my autograph, and that's like their last memory of church camp was an autograph and a picture with me. It's like, what is that? It's like there's and I again, like I still play some of these songs. It's a very different format. The way that we are positioned in a place, not in the center, like there are all these pieces to liturgy. There's so many things that aren't arbitrary. And I feel like in the great flattening, and this is what I had in my conversation with Eric, who he just did a rando with Paul a week or two ago. His dad's like a pastor at a mega church in Southern California. I had him on. And like we use words like style, preference, and taste. Like it's just like, well, they just have a different style. They just have a different taste. And it's like as if it's relative, as if it's these things don't have objective things that they do.
Yeah. And as a Catholic, like that's what I always feel funny in these conversations, because while we certainly have our fair share of liturgy wars for sure, like there's just not going to be a bog standard Catholic church that I'm going to walk into that's going to do the rock and roll thing. Like rock and roll, like you said, it's almost like rock and roll is fine for the praise and worship festivals, and Steubenville does them all the time, and they do a really good job with them. But like mass is mass. And I know our Orthodox brothers and sisters would, sort of have a similar probably experience where it's like, it's a weird thing that you all have to wrestle with, because for us, it's just wholly different.
Yeah. It is, but that, that's just been where we've at. There was one of the other piece. Okay. So I sent you this video. And I don't know if it's still any of those ideals are salient. We've gone a lot of different places, but it was like titled something like "The Monoculture is Dead."
Yeah,
and it's so funny because we spent a year warring against the monoculture, and then he's like, 25-year-old kid is like, and it's dead.
It's dead. Yeah. Well, yeah. So I first started hearing the monoculture being bandied about through Malcolm and Simone,
right?
And PVK picked up on it because it was sort of a helpful sort of, version of what I think Curtis Yarvin calls the cathedral or the blue church.
Yeah.
So that's how I initially came to the idea of the monoculture. But what was his name? Webster is his name. What's the kid's name?
I don't know. I just popped up and I was like, whoa.
I think his name is Chris Webster. I have no way to look it up now because I'm filming through my phone right now.
Quick, because
it doesn't matter. But what he seems to be talking about is this the basic boomer narrative, right? Which I grew up with was there were 3 or 4 channels. There was a main newspaper in the New York Times. There was the local newspaper and maybe the capital newspaper and the New York Times, right? And you watch CBS or NBC or ABC and you watch the same basic shows. And so there was a radical kind of unifying element to popular culture. And that's true, right? But now we live in a sort of a
Frac,
radically
frac,
fractured
yeah.
narrative structures, and we're nested in these mini subgroups or Discord groups or this little corner groups, right?
Yep.
Where we have very little in common. And what struck me about his video was that he was saying that this was true even between Gen Zers and Gen Alphas, right? And I think he's right about that. And this hit home to me about a year ago. I was in the car with my 2 younger children, and they were talking about the kids 2, 3, 4 years younger than them, and how they were all brain brain rotted, and they were talking about skibbity and all
Hmm.
of those little slang tags. And they were commenting on these kids who are 2 and 3 years younger than they are, who are like, they were crazy. That
Cringe.
like as if it was a whole other generation, a whole other different ecology. And I think they were right. And so it really struck me because when I was growing up, I didn't even know what Gen X was until I was in late high school. They were just my parents. Like we didn't even really call them boomers much. That was something that picked up currency in the Bill Clinton presidency because he was the first boomer president.
Hmm.
Um, but prior to that, and Tom Brokaw comes out with his book, The Greatest Generation, and there was there was just more and more talk about generations. But prior to that, it wasn't quite done
One of
in
the
the same
clips,
register.
one of the clips was of a Bill Maher talking to some guy, and he was like, "You and I grew up in the same house. You and I grew up in the
Yeah,
same world. If you were white or whatever, he
right.
was kind of like." And that was pretty striking
Yeah,
because we, even in, I'll reference this conversation I had with my wife is
yeah,
he's like, we have different algos,
yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah,
he's like,
yeah.
there's a lot of things you send me that's not very salient, and I'm sure vice versa. And then all of a sudden there was this thing, and she's like, hey, we could talk about that,
Yeah. That's good. That's good.
but it's like, yeah, that's happening all the time, and I think that's another reason. The guy in the video, his name's Casey Simpson's like
Casey Simpson. That's it. Yeah. Good.
430
Really
thousand.
talented guy.
Yeah,
Really talented guy. He's got a good thing there. Yeah.
yeah, and I was looking at that video I sent you. His other videos had like 400, 500 views, and this one had like 20 or 30,000. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like
Makes sense.
it kind of really came up
Yeah.
through, and that title, "Monoculture is Dead, We Killed It,"
We killed it. Yeah.
was really good, and he kind of at the end he paints this picture that maybe there's a positive way in which we can really specialize or something like that.
Yeah.
But he gave the capitalist critique, and we've actually hit on it about the war and even about like where I work, where you feel like a cog, in a
Yeah.
big giant corporate or materialistic machine or something. And there are these ways, and the corner is like an example of this, where people are able to find this little subgenre of
I would call it
influence.
I would call it a super genre, actually.
Okay, a super. Okay, yeah, go for it. What are you saying
Well,
there?
like in the sense that remember we were talking about egregores back in the day, and there's this idea that you've sort of got this sort of this level of activity, but Pajot says there's always like something above that is organizing all these little flotillas. So there's this thing above it that is animating it somehow. And I think there's something above it that is animating us here. Maybe that's my thought.
Yeah, the super. My conversation with James
Because
Foreman was like he calls them super predators too.
oh, that's interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, think about the TLC. Like, there's something that unites us, and it's sort of PVK, but it's not entirely PVK. He certainly gives it form and through his platform, right? That's interesting, platform form. He certainly gives it voice, and there's a certain liturgical regularity to the PVK experience. But all of us are tapping into something from our very, I mean, like, what do you and I have in common, Christian? Like, what do me, you, and Mick Mo have in common? What do me, you, Mick Mo, and Grimm have in common? What do me, you, Mick Mo, Grimm, and Matt Krotz have in common? And we can sort of just keep playing this game,
Yeah.
right? You know, or Nate, or Luke, or
Yeah.
you know, et cetera, et cetera. I know I'm gonna leave people out. Sorry, everybody.
Chad.
But Chad, right? Chad, like, what do we, you know, and Neil, and like, what do we have in common? It's weird.
Yeah.
I think it's some sort of super spirit.
Mm.
You know, that there's some reason why we are gravitating toward one another and having the kind of conversations that we're trying to have with one another. And maybe it is the exhaustion. It's a sort of a two-pronged thing, like an exhaustion within our monocultures, right? Or being some kind of exile from our local
Yeah.
monoculture,
Yeah.
and finding other people who are similarly exhausted or
Yeah.
something
Did you?
like that.
Yeah. And he hit on that. In that video, he was kind of like, you don't, there was a commonality, that this shared experience of all us, whenever, must see TV,
Oh
uh,
yeah,
you
dude,
know,
it was
even,
real. It was
even when
real.
it was just, and I kind of someone gave me the stats on this. I was shocked. Like Game of Thrones in my mind as a millennial was like the last
Big
thing.
shared thing.
I don't think there is. Taylor Swift's 35.
Yeah,
Like,
she's been popular for a long time.
but there's like, then underneath her, it's like there's not the idea of a celebrity. Why is Tom Cruise still selling out? Because he's, and Brad Pitt's trying to do a little bit of that
With
this new movie.
F1, yeah.
Like there's these last fumes
Yeah.
of collection, and then it's kind of over.
Yeah,
After,
yeah. And I think we all kind of sense that it's kind of over, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and so now we're in, like, Peterson sphere corner, like that, like, because even that, the fracturing now, you look at my algorithm, it's like crazy. I'm like, I don't, like, sometimes, like, used to it, there was like a cogency of something,
Yeah,
like, which, and so I'm asking the question, I don't remember who, I think I put it on Twitter a few months ago, but it was like, who are the sense makers? Like, how, because it's so, that's the other reason that people are, I think, looking back to greater traditions, because you can't even find sense in a guru yet anymore. Like, it's just kind of, I just need an institution. I can't find it in government, so I'm going to look to a religion or whatever.
So how about this? I'm going to propose an idea. See how this strikes you. We've been talking about the post-war consensus. I made the claim that there were a number of things that had to be left on the cutting room table, because we needed to sort of move on, and we needed to get past Nazis, and we needed to, get past the atomic bomb. And so there were a lot of these things that just got ignored. And but in time, those things that are ignored become big, right? It's like the dragon that you keep ignoring, and every time you ignore it, it gets bigger and bigger until you talk to it and look at it and all of that. And so now we are in this process where these old détentes have proven themselves to be ineffective. And so you're seeing this breaking down of all these superstructures as we try to figure things out our own, and this sort of everything's being sort of atomized down into its little parts. And so there's like thousands and thousands of Substacks, and there's thousands and thousands of YouTube channels, and there's thousands and thousands of all of these things are being broken back up. But I think this is a process of it's like shaking up the snow globe, right? So all these things are sort of flying around because we need to deal with a lot of things that we just didn't deal with, and we kind of papered over them as if they were eternal truths, but maybe they weren't. And so therefore, what is firm? What can I confidently put my pivot foot upon, right? Where's the terra firma? And so I think one of the reasons why Orthodoxy and traditional Catholicism and even traditional expressions of Protestantism are undergoing a weird sort of relook is because I think we're looking for something that's older than 1914.
Yeah.
Using 1914 as the date of the crack up.
Well, we could even use like 1912's the Titanic or
Oh, I
something.
love that. Yeah.
But,
No, I
but
mean, but it kind of works as a super symbol, doesn't it?
yeah,
The
yeah, the
confidence,
scene,
the
yeah.
it's both the marriage of the old world and the new, it's future, it's technology, it's unsinkable, and then here we are. We
Well,
should have paid more attention to the Titanic, right?
well, the plenty of 14-year-old girls did about
Oh gosh, I
yes,
know, yeah.
my wife being one of them. The when you said the snow globe, one of the things about this kind of, we talk about meta modernity is like postmodernism. It's like everything everywhere all at once. That's almost
Yes,
what the snow
yep,
globe thing
yep.
looked
That's right.
like when you said that. And it also just sparked up as like, maybe we're already in the Tower of Babel. Maybe the Tower of Babel has already fallen, because it's like, if we're being siloed
Oh,
off into these
oh,
these our own languages, our own, like, we don't even know how to speak to our neighbors anymore, like, because
yeah.
we're in different worlds in a way. And um you know now, I'm not even really talking metaphorically. I mean, in a certain way, some of that's really
Yeah,
happening.
yeah.
And then we try to find each other, with the spirit, to make sense of things, and to, I who can you sit down, who in my town would I sit down and have this specific conversation with? I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
and there may be my father-in-law and I can have conversations kind of like this, but like,
Mhm.
um it's very strange.
Well,
And yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I totally agree, and I track with you about who would I have this conversation with. I think that is why I lost my anxiety about YouTube. I lost my anxiety about social media when I realized that it was not a destination, but it was rather a kind of triage where we can have the kind of, like, we know that these conversations are somehow necessary, and we're practicing
Yeah.
ultimately for a kind of radical relocality or something like that.
Well, the thing that has come up to me multiple times is about agency,
Mm.
and that's one of those woke words for, is, but like, oh, we want to, but it's a weird thing when these things come back around, get called woke riot or whatever. It's
Yeah.
like, but what I began to notice, at least with the Paul Vanderklay randos, was that people were exerting a type of agency to speak on the internet on a ish largely, more than
Come out.
normal platform.
What do you say? Like, come out of the lurk. Come
Yeah.
out of the lurk. Yeah, totally,
And when you
totally.
do that, you are, and Paul actually just released this video about Sherry apparently has said she's kind of like stepping out of Grail
Oh
country.
yeah,
And
yeah, I saw
then,
that. I didn't
and
see the video yet, but I saw the
then
headline.
he gives a scathing, I don't know how to say it, response to a comment that MJ made on the video, calling Luke a coward. And Paul just kind of,
Uncharacteristically
yeah,
Paul. He's
rebuke, he
King
rebuked,
Winsome. Wow.
yeah.
All right, I can't. Okay, this is like real drama. I need to go. I need to go watch.
And that's like him saying, hey, because apparently he's blocked MJ in the past from his comments, or
Wow. Okay.
PVK had.
I see. I see.
So, but I'm just throwing these things out there. But the point he made was that Luke has his Whitestone name, and he uses his real name, and he's Luke Thompson, and he's talking on the internet, and his face is on the internet. And to me, that was kind of the courage that Peterson enacted at the most intense point of
Yeah.
of the culture war.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say that.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right.
This, when people would be like, well, I know Paul's associated with Peterson. I know Paul's associated with Peter.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm gonna associate myself with Paul, even if I don't really talk about the hot button issues. I am now doing this. And even Rebel Wisdom released that documentary early, and they
I
interviewed
remember.
Paul.
Yeah, I remember.
And in that, Paul said, people on YouTube are maybe people that don't have a lot to lose. And he was saying that back in 2017
Wow.
or something like that.
Yeah.
And so when
Wow.
you get on, and for you and I, you've been doing this for a couple of years now, and I've done this for over a year.
And we're both using our names, or
Yeah.
what you call it, a Whitestone name. I like that. Yeah.
And that's Luke's handle, I think.
Yeah.
And it's and that exerting a type of agency, to say, I'm going to speak technically to everybody that has an internet connection, even though we,
Yeah,
most people in the world don't.
1,000 at best. Yeah.
It's like, but there was something to that, and then when they were encouraged in their agency, and we encourage each other in that agency to be the kind of persons, to be ourselves, or like a very true part. I had real existential, intense feelings about X, Y, and Z in the culture, and and I've associated myself to that, to greater and lesser degrees, and I. And that's where sometimes, people are like, Peterson's old stuff is stuff, and I don't like his new stuff. I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like, but you have to honor, like, there's something you have to honor related to that, and I'll keep that refrain, for a long time.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. I certainly have my opinions about that stuff, but I'm sort of in the forever grateful camp,
Yeah.
but the fact that this place that, you and I are engaging in right now, is not a destination point, but it's necessary, right? I think both you and I feel it in our bones. We feel it at the cellular level that this is somehow necessary, and not in the just a sort of let's go save the world type way, but like save me. Like I need to do this, and so on some level, because I need to do this or I might go crazy. You know,
Do you feel, McMo started calling you Unc,
yeah,
I
I
think it
love
was
it.
him.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
this monitoring the situation meme that came
yeah,
out, a week
yeah,
or so ago.
yeah,
And, and I was asking that, I already mentioned this, but like, who are the sense makers? Like, is there a part of you, like, as you, like you just said, like, I'm trying to make sense of this. And as a
yeah,
result, you become a sense maker if you're doing it.
yeah, yeah,
And, even for Paul, he's like, well, I'm going to talk to Kale about the new Pope because he's helping me make sense of this as somebody embodied in that. And
mhm.
you're, like, because you have a history, you have a quote unquote lived experience.
Yeah, yeah. That's real. It's real. Yeah, yeah,
And, and, uh, and, as this shift is happening, before our eyes, I feel like, because it was like, okay, this, the Peterson thing made sense of a time. And
yeah,
now we're in a new time, and we're trying to make sense of it, and it's kind of broader than just the intense culture that was like, at war. Now we're looking at something else. So it's going to be an interesting time. Like in your mind right now, do you have like, who would you say is a sense maker for you?
yeah. Like in my pantheon, like my working
Yeah,
Mount Olympus right now. Well, I mean, PVK helps me a ton, but
yeah,
if I'm going to go bigger, no offense, Paul, um, I mean, I pay for Mary Harrington's Substack.
mm,
She's wise. She sees, and I appreciate her for that. Um, I think the world of her. I like Louise Perry quite a bit. Um, I think Ross Douthat is. I'm going
having
to
a moment,
I'm
having a
going to.
moment.
Well, yeah, I've known Ross for a really long time. Not as well, obviously, as Rod, but like, and again, not trying to brag, but like if I would see Ross, he'd be like, "Hey, Kale, like sit on down, like
Yeah,
let's have lunch together." Like, so uh, again, so I know him, but I have just such a tremendous amount of respect for him. Um, I cannot tell you how often a guy like Ross will get plucked up from, sort of a right wing echo chamber, get plucked up and given the platform like the New York Times. And look, everybody can make fun of the New York Times all they want. I certainly have my fair share of fun doing it. But the New York Times is still a big effing deal, to quote our former president. You know, and when something happens on in the New York Times, like it can move the needle. And I would imagine being that close to the ring would be awfully tempting. It would be awfully tempting to aggrandize myself to the basic readership of the New York Times. But Ross, who's been there for gosh,
yeah,
20 years now, I bet it's close to 20 years, has just been tremendously nimble, consistent,
Faithful.
not closed off, faithful,
Yeah.
like in real ways. I've been penning in my head. Sorry for the mixed metaphor. I've been penning in my head a thank you note to him that I
Mm,
think I'm going to publish, because everybody else I've ever seen ultimately gets cannibalized by the cathedral,
mm,
and he hasn't. So I like I trust Ross Douthat.
yeah.
And I cannot say that about a lot of people. I can disagree with Ross. I certainly have disagreed with Ross. I can decide to take a different kind of tone or demeanor in the public space. I am different than Ross, but just a tremendous amount of respect for him. And he's as good as he was as a blogger, as good as he is as a columnist. He's like a better podcaster. The dude's just good. He's
Yeah.
just so talented because he's got a fundamentally generous mind that is not afraid to stand for something, but also not afraid to have deep conversations about people he ultimately disagrees with. So to me, he's a real model. He's a model sense maker.
Yeah. It'll be interesting because I mean, it's only had, I don't know, like half a dozen. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Episodes or something to see where that goes. That's part of this shift into the podcasting, post
Yeah. Yeah.
Rogan. Rogan was
Yeah.
a sense maker. I don't
Yeah.
see, I feel like that kind of is like, so there is this kind of
Yeah.
nextness
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
that as well in an interesting way. But man, dude, the sun's starting to eat you alive out there. So I'm going to, kind of,
Hold on. How's this? Is this
I don't know.
better?
You tell me. Okay. Well, if you're sitting back, maybe it's a little better because I
Is that all
didn't
right?
want to. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a little bit. I mean, I'm just looking at your face and I'm like, man, I
I'm
hope
good right here. I think this is good. If I'm framed, you just tell me. I
yeah,
think
you're
I'm good.
framed good. You're
All right.
framed
Good.
good.
Yeah, we're good. Yeah.
So, but yeah, dude, I just didn't want to keep going if you were going to.
No. I'm comfy. I'm comfy.
All
Do
right,
you
man.
think?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I haven't watched probably a whole episode of him, but I caught some of the PBKs and I know I watched, I think I did watch one of it, maybe his first. So was it Black and White? No, I watched one of his early ones, but yeah, you mentioned Mary Harrington. She was interesting at ARC because
Yeah.
she was on the panel with the AI panel, and she was the most. I went to the. She wasn't. She was on the AI panel in the main session. She on. She was on the one. I went to the AI dinner one, and
Yeah. Okay.
Peterson was there, and then there was there's a guy I follow on X. I can't remember his name. He's a young guy. There was kind of somebody that's I think from Cambridge, and then there was her, and she had the most or the least amount of faith in AI. I think that was what was interesting.
Interesting.
Like it's a bicycle, it's a tool, it's
Yeah.
a thing, and everyone else is kind of having some pretty deep existential
Angst about it.
perceptions and all
Yeah.
these kinds of things, and I think it was honestly, I don't think the Peterson conversation went well at ARC, but uh, but that in that setting, this panel setting that I went to, he was he was the most curious and the most humble.
Yeah.
In that setting, and that was a classic experience to see him in that. But you're right. She has a confidence about what she believes related
Yeah.
to.
She speaks with a kind of an authority of someone who has earned her perspective, and I really appreciate that. Like she's not afraid to say she's wrong, so it's not like bravado or anything like
Yeah.
that. But she knows what she knows, and she's not afraid about the things that she doesn't know. And
Mm.
so for me, I take that as a kind of model, and part of my own journey with this is just sort of recognizing that I actually know some things.
Yeah.
I have been so isolated for so long, just toiling away in a good way, in my vineyard here in the classroom. And I didn't realize, I forget like that I know stuff. I forget that I'm really, like, on average, like really well read. And that always surprises me. I forget that I know the references to things, and anyway. So I appreciate her because she is not afraid. Like, she's authoritative without being a jerk.
Mm. Yeah. she stands almost like standing her ground or something.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what you were saying about being feel like I actually know some things. I just turned 40. I'm having to choose to believe that about myself. Aaron Wren, kind of a friend of the corner,
I like Aaron Wren too. I like him.
He recently it's salient because he made probably one of his earlier comments, one of his probably first comments about Redeemed Zoomer. And he said, I don't get what because everyone was critiquing, like he was on with Trent Horn, he was on with Gavin Ortland, and people were like picking apart this 22-year-old, and he's like, what astounds Aaron Wren was basically saying, I haven't seen somebody with like the kind of Silicon Valley energy of a Zuckerberg or a Musk that I see in this kid. And I kind of see whether he makes all the right moves or he gets this theology right and people pick, he has a confidence that is really fascinating, and of course we can all say pride comes before the fall and all stuff. Yes.
Yeah, but
the thing that Aaron said that was fascinating to me is he said and he kind of echoes what you just said, which y'all are both Gen X. And he was like,
exactly.
He was like, I don't realize that I should be, he said, I don't know, why can't I say this? He was like, I should be speaking with more of that kind of confidence. Yeah. He's like, why do I feel like I can't? Why do I feel like I can't have, I can't speak with a certain amount of confidence at 55 about.
Well, I know why. I know why. It's because, and here I'm going to sound like a millennial, but the boomers didn't make way for us. I mean, look, we're Gen X. We're the smallest generation, right? By the way these cohorts are drawn up. And, the boomers have blocked us. Again, not necessarily maliciously, so I don't want, but like, well, I don't want to go in my own biography, but,
J.D. Vance is vice president.
We're right. And I love J.D. Vance, like fine, but that's exactly right. And we lived in the shadow and the specter of the boomers for so long. Like, look, I mean, just to be blunt, Christian, like I wanted to be, the thing that I really wanted to be is I wanted to be a college professor, right? And when I was in graduate school in 95, 96, and 97, it was abundantly clear to me then that there was no chance that I would ever be a college professor because nobody was retiring. And those people that they were hiring, I didn't match the demographics. Just period. Now it's fine. I've charted my own path here, and I've sort of figured some things out. I'm still doing what I love, which is teaching. But but that sucks.
Yeah.
To be blunt, right? And so anyway, to connect this back to Ren's point is that I think there's a reason why we Gen Xers are a little bit hesitant to be authoritative, because we saw the blowhards above us and we kind of didn't want to be that, Yeah,
it was like it's own quiet rebellion,
Right,
and then the millennials. I was watching another video. I was talking. I released a video with a friend of mine here in the studio. Actually, he's 27, and he's, I mean, self-admittedly at times black-pilled, and when I talked to President Foxman before, there's this like latent nihilism just in the world. Like, I did not grow up that way. As a millennial, I was told I was still believed you can be whatever you want. Like that was my parents are like young baby boomers.
First wave boomer parents. Yeah.
And they were like, you could, follow the American dream was still like what I was told. And I think all of us, quote unquote, believe, a lot of my generation, I'm 40 in the last, we kind of still believe in those possibilities.
Yeah.
And I saw a video yesterday. It's like millennials sucked up all the hope. And so that's what's striking about the young man of Redeemed Zoomer, like his confidence of like that things he actually has a hopeful type of optimism with his, but it's like in the face of massive amount of nihilism.
Yeah.
That's why I think that cuts through. But it is interesting, like So I sit here and I say, I encourage you to continue to keep making sense of things to help us make sense of things, with like you're saying, and lean into, whatever, trusting yourself. And
Yeah, I thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, the thing that animates me is, and again, this is sort of directly speaking to the monoculture is dead, we killed it guy, is that I know that the worst thing that we can do is to become completely cut off, totally and completely cut off from our traditions. Like, I know that that is a recipe for amnesia, and and the amnesiac is always vulnerable. And so anything that I could do to reconnect millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alphas to this patrimony that has been neglected, I want these roots to be to grow deeper and to reconnect to those things, because I think it's just a necessary ballast against
yeah,
the sort of the speed and the relentless quality to our culture,
yeah,
to a social media driven culture in which, something is old and retro when it's like 2 years old now.
man. Even us discussing like your memes and stuff that like
Yeah,
feel like internet time
yeah,
is unreal. It's not
right,
human, and
right.
you're talking about the slower things, and we need to remember, dude.
Yeah,
Well,
and it's so important, is this last thing. I mean, it's
yeah,
so important to reconnect. It was hugely important and consequential for me personally to be reconnected to something that was older, than 1969, right? And so, and then when I found out that there were things that were important that were older than 1914 or 1912, as you said, like, man, that was hugely life changing. And then you could sort of just keep going back, like, oh my gosh, I can read something that was written in 1308, and it speaks to me at the most fundamental core of my humanity. Like, wow, like imagine that. So I want to share that, and I think that the only way to stop the churn is to reconnect people to these older things, these older strains, to sort of slow it down just enough, so that the boat doesn't stop rocking back and forth. So that is what animates me in this space specifically.
well, it's interesting. In I'm in my life, like I have this studio, and there's like lights and a camera and sound equipment, and it's this, but it's like I don't. This is the right place. I'm in the digital place. This is the right place for this. Okay,
Yeah,
but I don't. This isn't really where I want to go to church anymore.
yeah. That's
Uh,
exactly right.
and
Yeah.
I lived in a world where that was trying to do both of these things. Like,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, yes,
Uh,
yes.
and it's like, okay, this is, I'm not going to just like hate myself again. Like, okay, I'm going to lean into this stuff here, but there's other, like, where I want to go to church. Actually, I'm not, this stuff needs to really, really, really be thought. I go back to this. I don't remember who said it, but it may have been you early. I don't remember what that, I think it was you. You told me that when the PA systems first came out, they didn't know if the Pope's voice was still the Pope's voice on the other side of that PA
Yeah,
system.
yeah, yeah,
That will forever be in my mind.
yeah, yeah.
Just that kind of contemplative relationship to technology in a space. And
Well,
so,
I'm inclined to say this out loud. I don't know if I think I believe it, but I think ultimately church has to be acoustic.
mm,
Um, and now we all know that acoustic technology includes pipe organs, so you can go pretty loud with acoustic. But I do think that ultimately, because if it's acoustic, it's embodied. It's
yeah,
in a it's in a space that is large enough to contain everybody, but small enough that you can hear what's going on.
yeah,
So I tend to think in that direction, to be honest with you.
yeah. I don't know if you knew or saw. We moved into this old colonial style church
I did.
building.
It's beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah,
I saw it on the internet. Yeah.
yeah, and like I've just really been thinking so much about all that stuff, and that's a, you know, um, yeah, and part of my conversation I had with Eric Benjamin, we covered that related to, he was like, I mean, it's a whole nother conversation, so I'm not going to go down there,
It's okay. Yeah,
but dude, yeah, I mean, we're kind of coming up on our time today, and
yeah,
I just want to again say thank you. I feel like we've like, man, we were just like firing back, and
yeah.
it
This is
was
good.
really cool. And
It's
so yeah, go
it's
ahead.
generative. No, I was just say it's a real generative conversation. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, man, thank you for coming on, and we'll continue to bump into each other. I look forward to meeting you face to face, shaking your hand
I
at
can't wait.
Midwest.
Yeah, and I really want to encourage everybody to come. I mean, it's going to be
Yeah,
great. I'm sure smart things will be said by all the other presenters, but just to be able to meet everybody in person, spend some meet space time together, I think it's
yeah.
just huge. I think it's huge.
I was thinking about that word meat space because we kind of uh the meat sacks MEAT, but it's also MEET.
Yes, right. I
You
love
know,
play on the homophone there. That's great. That's
yeah.
right.
So, all
MEET
right,
and MEAT. That's good. Love it.
all right, dude. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and thanks for sitting out. Hopefully, the New England weather is way more favorable than the Arkansas
Yeah,
one.
yeah, this is where we get, you get to make fun of me in January and February and March, and I get to make fun of you in July and August. So,
That's
yeah.
right, man. All right, dude. Well,
All right, brother. Be
we'll end
well.
this thing backstage.
All right, cheers.
Midwestuary 2025, August 22nd through the 24th in Elmhurst, Illinois. A weekend you won't want to miss with special guests Kale Zelden, Paul Vanderklay, Rod Dreer, Elizabeth Oldfield, John Vervaeke, and Jonathan Pajot. Midwestuary 2025, the Fellowship of the Spirit. Stay tuned for more details. Visit us at midwestuary.com for ongoing updates.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.